Hello, chess assassins.
Welcome to my channel. I wanted to analyze a game between FIDE Master Tani Adewumi and Grandmaster Daniel Naroditsky. This game took place back in 2022 at the Charlotte Chess Center. Prior to this game, back in 2021, Grandmaster Naroditsky was hosting a show on which one of his special guests were former world champion Garry Kasparov. And the topics were the Queen's Gambit, the Kasparov Chess Foundation, and games that were played in the 2021 KCF University Cup event. If you like to see that show that GM Naroditsky was hosting, I have posted the link to that video in the description as well. Now, this match between the two players took place back in 2022 at the U.S. Masters chess tournament at the Charlotte Chess Center. Those of you who don't know, Adewumi is a FIDE master from Nigeria. He became famous for winning the New York State Championship tournament at the age of 8. Now let's get to our game.
Now, this is a very fun and exciting opening. The Caro-Kann exchange variation forces the player to become aggressive. The game started off with e4, c6, d4. Black plays d5. Now, let's pause here for a minute. White captures the pawn on d5, and most likely Black will recapture with the c pawn. That means that Black will not have a pawn on the c file to challenge White's pawn on d4. And one of White's plans is to post a knight on the dark squares. White's pawn on d4 controls both e5 and c5, a square on which White can post a knight. E takes d5, c takes d5. And bishop d3 was played. Main line. Now the exchange variation begins with this move to prevent Black from developing his bishop to f5. Knight f6. c3. Bishop g4. And queen b3. Now let's go back for a minute. Now knight c6, c3, knight f6, bishop f4, and bishop g4. Queen b3. Now this line is considered to offer White a slightly better game and was tried by Bobby Fischer. Now some of the strategic ideas are analogous to the Queen's Gambit Decline exchange variation with colors reversed. Alright, taking the moves back. Knight f6, and now c3, bishop g4, queen b3 was played. Queen c7, h3, and bishop d7. Knight e2, and bishop c6 was played in the game. But I want you to look at an interesting line. Knight c6. The idea of playing knight c6 is to push the e-pawn forward 2 squares, making the d-pawn isolated. Now, by accepting the isolated d-pawn, Black's game becomes dynamic, very energetic. For instance, kingside castle. Now for Black, the idea is to compensate for the weakness of the d-pawn and to also prevent White's army from developing in an optimal way. e5. Now if White does not capture this pawn, then it will advance to e4, making the bishop on d3 a bad bishop. And so d takes e5, knight takes e5, bishop b5, bishop d6, and bishop g5. Now while White continues to prove his opening advantage, Black tries to step on White's opening advantage, or in other terms, challenge White's opening advantage. Knight e4, bishop f4. Now Black has an isolated pawn on d5. That means that he must quickly go for a kingside attack while at the same time attacking White's pieces. Knight c5. Bishop takes d7 check. Knight takes d7. In between move. Bishop takes d6. Queen takes d6. Queen c2. Notice how Black continues to defend the d-pawn, because one of the goals for Black is to post a knight either on e4 or c4. Now while Black's knights play around the d5 pawn, the pawn itself controls those 2 squares. So Black takes care that the pawn is well guarded. Kingside castle, knight d4, rook f to e8, and knight d2. As White, one of your main tasks is to blockade the opponent's d-pawn. Rook ac8, rook fd1. This rook x-rays the opponent's queen. And queen f6. Knight on 2 to f3. Knight e4. Rook e1. Knight e5. Rook on a to d1. And Black can play either knight to c4, posting a knight on e4 and the knight on c4, and the other move is queen g6. Notice how the knight on e4 and the queen on f6 x-rays the pawn on f2, and the knight on d4 protects the knight on f3 should black decide to take the knight. Very interesting game. Whereas here, should white push the b pawn trying to kick the knight off the c4 square, then the pawn on c3 becomes weak. Now let's get back to our game. So in the game, bishop c6 was played, and the game continued. Bishop f4, queen c8, king side castle, e6, knight d2, bishop e7, knight f3, knight b to d7, knight e5, knight takes e5, bishop takes e5, king side castle, queen c2, h6, a4, queen d8, a5, a6, queen b3, bishop d6, rook f to e1, queen c7, bishop captures bishop on d6, black recaptures the bishop on d6, knight g3, rook f e8, rook e3, queen c7, and queen b4. Now, one of the main key ideas for white is to either lift a rook to the third rank for attacking chances, or to advance the f-pawn 2 squares, with the idea of keeping a grip on the e5 square. Rook on a to e1 creates a battery on the e-file, and the queen controls the a3 to f8 diagonal with a grip on the dark squares. This is called dark square strategy. Black, on the other hand, is playing a light square strategy. Queen e7, queen b3, queen c7, queen b4, rook a d8, rook on a to e1. Queen d6. Queen b6. And bishop to b5. Now here white can either exchange queens or capture the pawn on b7. However, in doing so, white accepts an inferior position that black will be very happy to play if black captures the pawn on b7. For instance, queen takes b7, and the line goes rook b8, queen a7. Now take a look at the pawn on b2. That pawn will fall. Bishop takes d3, rook takes d3, rook takes b2. Black will use the b file by swinging the other rook over from e8 to b8, creating a battery. And lastly, the rook on b2 eyes the pawn on f2, which is white's most vulnerable square. So instead of taking on b7, the first player decided to trade the queens. And now queen takes d6 and the game continued. Rook takes d6. Now the bishop on d3 is a valuable piece for white in this position. A good, very good bishop that's on the opposite color of the pawns on b2, c3, and d4, including f2. While those pawns cover the dark squares, white's bishop attacks along the b1 to h7 diagonal. So white declined the offer to trade the light square bishops. Bishop c2, b6, rook a1, b takes a5, rook takes a5, rook b8, f4, getting a stronger grip on the e5 square, g6, king f2. Now king f2 was played in the game, but another line that may be interesting is knight to h1. Now this may be a line that white would want to play, considering that he would have two pawns on the c and d files. For an instance, bishop to c4 and the line goes b4, gaining more space on the queen's side. Rook b5, g4, and rook takes a5. B takes a5, rook d8, f5. Having three pawns on the king's side, whereas black has four pawns on the king's side. This is called a minority attack. The person with the fewer pawns attacks the opponent's pawns. So after e takes f5, g takes f5, and g5 keeping the g file closed, or half closed rather. Knight f2, rook b8, rook e7, rook b5, bishop d3, rook takes a5. Bishop takes c4, d takes c4, rook c7, rook a1 check, king h2, rook a2, king g3, h5. Rook takes c4 and king g7. And although the evaluation says that black's position is better, He does have to find a way to stop white's pawns on c3 and d4. Although black does have an outside pass pawn on the a file. So the question is, what would black do to stop these pawns? So the move played in the game was king f2. And the game continued. Bishop c4, b4, rook c6, king e1, h5, king d2, bishop b5. The problem that white has now is defending the backward c pawn, a backward pawn, and black exploits this. Bishop a4, h4, bishop takes b5, a takes b5, knight e2, knight e4 check, king c2, knight d6, rook f3, rook on b to c8, and g4. H takes g3 en passant, knight takes g3, king g7, knight e2, rook on 6 to c7, knight c1, knight f5, knight b3, knight d6, knight c5. So white has managed to block the backward c pawn, posting the knight on c5, which is an absolute post. Knight c4, another absolute post. Rook a6, rook h8, and rook g3. Now here, white does manage to find a tactical shot, but write this in your notes that pretty tactics does not guarantee that the resulting position will be winning for the tactician. What will the resultant position be? Rook h4, f5. E takes f5. And what this does is it opens the sixth rank. The rook on the sixth rank is open to the pawn on g6, and the rook on g3 is open to the pawn on g6, whereas the knight on c5 is looking to go to the e6 square where it will check the king. In the game, rook on g takes g6, check. F takes g6, and now knight e6 check. King f7, knight takes c7. Rook takes h3, And black has 2 passed pawns on the king's side. Rook a7, rook h2 check, king c1, g5, knight takes d5 with a discovered check, king f8, rook a8 check, king f7, rook a7 check, king g6, knight e7 check, king f6, knight d5 check, king e6, knight e7 check, king d6, knight takes b5 check, king c6, and rook c7 check. King takes b5, rook c5 check, king b6, rook takes e4. g4, rook c8, g3, rook g8, and g2. If the king steps to the second rank, then the pawn advances with a discovered check to the king. On the other hand, rook delivers check to the king on the first rank, after which pawn promotes to queen. Therefore, white conceded the game. Thank you for watching. That's all I have. Remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Stay tuned for my next video.